Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator, and welcome to AV Plus, the podcast for the Commercial AV Integration Channel. We have a great show today featuring David Danto, who is IMCCA's Director of Emerging Technology and Poly's Director of UC Strategy and Research. He is just back from Enterprise Connect, and he has insights about what the show tells us about how the commercial AV industry will adapt to ongoing changes in enterprise. For example, the work from home movement, the great resignation, and how emerging technologies will affect how integrators can approach all of those opportunities and the channel broadly. Welcome to AV Plus. It's a great show, and thank you for tuning in.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
So happy to be joined today by David Danto, who is IMCCA's Director of Emerging Technology, as well as Poly's Director of UC Strategy and Research. Thank you so much for joining me, David. Really appreciate you taking some time out to chat.
Oh, Dan, it's always a pleasure with you. I'm happy to talk to anybody in the industry and talk about the things that are top of mind.
Very kind of you. So you're just back from Enterprise Connect, and I want to primarily talk about that, your observations, what you saw there in terms of top line trends and how it gave you a sense of where the industry is going, where workplace trends are going, et cetera. You did not attend InfoComm 21. You did not believe that it was a safer or wise idea, I suppose. You did go to CES a few months later. You went to Enterprise Connect, obviously, last week. What was the calculation that you made as far as deciding to go to CES, deciding to go to Enterprise Connect? Why did you deem those events safe?
Well, we're dealing with peaks and valleys of this pandemic, and everybody wants it to be over before it is actually over. I didn't think InfoComm 21, when they were planning it, was a wise idea because it was being done in a location that I think had not the best reporting in terms of illnesses. We can debate the political pieces of that as long as we want, but I was very uncomfortable with that. And I was uncomfortable encouraging people to attend when I felt it was unsafe. And as it turns out, some pretty high-profile people associated with our industry came back with COVID. So it turned out to be, at least in my opinion, a good decision. I was also going through a couple of medical challenges at the time, so it was more risk than I wanted to take. CES, on the other hand, while we had dropped into a valley, but then started to get back to a peak again with the Omicron thing, CES was a different experience because, for me, InfoComm and to a lesser extent, Enterprise Connect and some of the other ones are personal things. I'm there to see and meet with the people and break bread and have dinner and hug and enjoy. And CES for me is not that show. For me, as an industry analyst and industry observer, I'm not there to really socialize. I'm there to look at the technology and look at the presentations and the various things that are coming out there. So I was comfortable attending CES with an N95 mask all the time. Didn't eat out in any places other than one occasion when I met with a couple of colleagues and we all ate outdoors in front of Paris, Las Vegas, actually, a beautiful restaurant. And the rest of the time I was wearing my mask. And, I got invited to, as well as some of your colleagues did, to a lot of the industry events. The press gatherings, the analyst gatherings, where they typically are indoors in a large meeting room and they serve food. And I'm watching brilliant writers, very intelligent people thinking, oh, you know what? That's okay. I'm among reporters taking off their masks and starting to eat. And as it turns out, I was actually interviewing some of the people from Abbott at the time about their test kits. And we were looking at the reporters that were taking off their masks to eat the free food. And it's like, don't you understand this concept of keeping your mask on indoors? So in that context, CES was safe because I never unmasked. I ate privately, either outdoors or privately in my room. We're at a point where Omicron had passed. We're definitely in a valley right now. People tested; they had to show their ID that they were vaccinated and or had a recent test to go in. I brought my mask with me, and in fact, I don't know if you see any pictures of me from the show. I clipped my mask to my ID badge. I wore it on elevators. I think it was KN95 this time. I wore it on elevators. I wore it in bigger places. So did everybody else. A lot of other people brought masks. Most people didn't wear them because, again, this was a situation where we were embracing each other. We were shaking hands, and you'll see me at conferences. I'm going to shake your hand because I'll never be broken of that habit. And then I whip out the Purell and I start giving everybody the Purell in real time, and everybody accepts it, or most everybody does. But I hugged people I'd never hugged before, and I realized I wasn't really embracing them. I was embracing the ability to be a human being again, in a situation that was, I felt, safe. And the Gaylord Palms, where this conference is held, is a very weird place. You're indoors, but you think you're outdoors. It's kind of a big terrarium, a biodome. It's a very, very large ceilings, very well ventilated, very interesting area. So the bottom line is, it was a risk. It wasn't as much of a risk as it was back when the other show was taking place. It wasn't as much of a risk as CES, so I felt okay taking my mask off, as did most people. Um, there's a new variant coming. You've seen the meme online on the internet with the gentleman playing Mr. Scrooge out the window saying, boy, what variant is it this morning? Um, I, we don't know. We don't know what the story is going to be like in a week, much less in a month, much less than 3 months. But this looked like a trade show where most everybody was back. Industry travelers could travel from around the world again. Why do you want to have an international show that only has local participants? That doesn't make any sense. There were people there from Europe. There were people there from Asia. It was a really great getting together. I would say probably like 85-90% of the industry people showed up. Analysts, industry, technologists. I would say probably more like 30% of the customers showed
Mhm.
up. That was lower than usual. It's not always a very customer heavy show, Enterprise Connect, but it was less than usual. Still, there were a good number of people there, got a lot accomplished, great show, and it felt good to be out again. Now we just have to hope that if nobody gets sick in 5 days, that it was a good guess, and we keep moving forward from there, and hopefully the next trade show and the one after that and the one after that, because there's a huge lineup of them that I'm going to be at this year if they take place and if it's safe. There's NAB, there's ISE taking place. There's probably going to be an IMCCA event taking place in May, which hasn't been announced yet, but we're real close to it. And there's InfoComm in June. So I'm very hopeful that we may be at the end of this, and if we're not, we mask up or decide not to travel again.
Well, here is to that hope. I certainly share with you the idea of wanting to get back in person to chat with people and network and hold hands and hug and just get to know people again as human beings, as you say, get back to reality. It was gratifying internally in our own organization to see shows like KBIS and Pizza Expo do so well with people coming back to their respective communities. So it's a good thing. And I do hope that we continue to keep the variants at bay, even though, as you say, you never know what's going to be coming around the corner. Getting
Kudos
back
to
to the
Jason for KBIS and for CEDIA last year, and for CEDIA coming up later this year.
yes, Jason McGraw is the man, so kudos to him. As far as the technologies go and what they tell you about where workplaces are going, where education spaces are going, primarily the workspaces and enterprise, where do you see the industry going now that you've spent several days enmeshed with thought leaders and technology, deployers? Where do you get the sense of how things are going to be turning out?
It's interesting. I've spoken about this before, and I got a lot of my beliefs reinforced at the show talking to other people. You don't, as human beings, we don't recognize that we're in a time of tremendous upheaval and transition during it. So, you have to look back in retrospect 3, 4, 5 years down the road and what it was like and what we went through. We are going through a time of tremendous change, tremendous transition, upheaval. Things are shaking out all over the place, and the technology and society are kind of going hand in hand and moving both together. I mean, it's interesting that the no one has really given us the parade we deserve. I don't know if I've had this conversation with you, but I know I've said it before. In that, obviously, millions of people around the world, devastated by the illness, and that's not a time to celebrate. But the world, for the most part, stayed in business using the technology we've been talking about for decades.
Mhm.
Um, Remote working works. It worked really well. We learned about some things that we never would have learned about had we not gone through this. About video fatigue and about how hard it is to break away, and some of the other things about how top-down communication works, but peer-to-peer is lost unless you foster it very well. So we did learn a lot. But now coming out of this, we're in a situation where many organizations, not all, but many organizations want to see people back in the office safely as soon as it's safe, and most knowledge workers don't want to go there. I heard stats from end user companies that they were sharing with me off the record, that when they were surveyed, between 70 to 90% of employees said, no, we're fine, we can work from home. This is better. I can now live where I want to live. I can live near my parents. I can live where the babysitting, the childcare is more cost effective, where there's better quality of life. I don't need to live near the city all the time. And maybe I want to live near the city where the clubs are. But so many people are saying, no, you're going to have to give me the flexibility. And you have a whole range of organizations trying to deal with that. Whether it's no, you are coming back to the office, and that's part of the reason why we're seeing some of the great resignation, because people realize they have choices. Whether it's companies saying, all right, you know what, we'll give you, and there's, hey, you come into work 3 days a week, you stay home 2 days a week. Formulas are just as bad, in my personal opinion, as going back into the office, because I wake up in the morning, I look at my calendar, I see what meetings I have today or tomorrow or the next day, and I need to be present for those meetings. And if it
Mhm.
can be like I'm meeting with you now over video, that's awesome. If I have to look at a client side, I'm going to go to client side. If there's a team building situation, a celebration or an exercise, I'm going to go to an office. I'm the best person to make that choice, not based on any formula. Some weeks I may spend 2 weeks in Hong Kong, dealing with a construction project going up, like I did in past in my life. Some weeks I might be able to spend a whole month at home. A formula doesn't work. Hiring smart people who know their job, giving them the authority and the permission to understand, giving them the right tools so that work, can work remotely, and
Mhm.
letting them choose is really the way it's going. And again, like I said, these are all dominoes, as we've talked about, that cascade into each other. The office, as we know it, is dead. There will still be offices, there will still be people working in central locations, but the point of traveling to a place to sit down at a desk to do individual work doesn't make sense anymore. So what we'd seen in these long rows of individuals doing individual work is not really the purpose of the office going forward, in my opinion. The purpose of the office is collaboration, is meeting, is getting together with people, is hugging and shaking hands and working on a whiteboard and putting notes on a wall and doing all the things that we do when we want to be together. So I think that you're going to start to see the office design change. I heard from a couple of clients this morning, just off the record, that were telling me that they're knocking down offices, personal offices, and they're
Mhm.
making them meeting rooms. And this idea, and I've been in enterprise, construction for decades. This idea that you'd have like two video conference rooms on a floor because they were so expensive, and then all the other ones would just be audio conferencing. That's not going to work anymore. You're starting to see offices where all the rooms need to be equipped to do equitable meetings,
Mhm.
and the meaning of that changes completely. I'll take a breath and let's get into it. But this whole idea of how do we make the meetings work when people are all over and distributed in a hybrid environment, it's definitely the challenge that people see and that most companies were talking about at the show.
So that's definitely very interesting to me, and I've lived that to some extent. When I was with Sound and Communications prior to the pandemic, I was going into the office 5 days a week without exception. We had accommodations, obviously, during the pandemic for safety, but even post-pandemic, we were going in 3 days a week or 4 days a week or something. It wasn't necessarily a situation where knowledge workers like me and my colleagues were working remotely. Now I'm pretty much fully remote, and I agree with you that a lot of knowledge workers, myself included, those of my colleagues who are also fully remote included, are able to do what we're doing from home without having to go into a physical office. But I do want to play devil's advocate just for a moment and ask you a question about company culture. Do you feel like if everyone is dispersed and they're primarily interacting through meetings, they sometimes go into an office to collaborate or to do some kind of team building, but largely they're sitting in their home office, their basement, whatever the case might be, does that cut against or cannibalize the potential for real meaningful corporate culture? And if so, what are the ramifications of that?
Well, it's a great point, and the concept of corporate culture needs to be focused on and developed, regardless of where people are and regardless of what the tool sets are that they are using. You can't just assume because everybody walks into the same building every day and there's a dress code and they see the people down in the lobby being security that fosters a culture. Culture is much more than that. Culture, very important for culture. Company cultures now to be, honoring the people that work for them, to be celebrating diversity, diversity of types of thought, of backgrounds, and that diversity requires that you enable people to work from wherever they are. But again, people don't just sit down and turn on their devices and bingo, you have a culture. You're going to have to do work to make people understand what's available, and you're going to have to make those in-person meetings, as long as they're safe, happen at central meeting points, whether that's a restaurant in your town or whether that's a remote satellite office or whether that's a main corporate headquarters. You're going to have to bring people into them for the events. You're going to have to make sure that people understand that they should be sharing, that they do have the ability to turn off the technology and go have a life. It's not easy for everyone to do, and it's not appropriate for every role. But fostering culture, it's one of those things and when a company CEO says, these are our top 5 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they have 10,000 people watching that video stream, the communication works.
Mhm.
But if I want to ask you, what was it like with your kids yesterday, or what happened at school, or what was your vacation like, you're going to need other platforms and other opportunities, space that nurtures those communications, whether they're in person or remote, and all of those lead to company culture. So I don't necessarily believe that going back to an office leads to a good culture. Going back to an office may lead to, in fact, an ineffective culture. Developing an effective, nurturing culture at an organization is critical, and there need to be people that are working on that regardless of where they are.
So thinking about offices then, as you said, as kind of collaborative spaces, group work spaces, basically spaces that are for something other than individual desk work. How is that going to affect how integrators deal with these kinds of spaces in the future? Because as you know, commercial integrators audience is probably 85, 90% integrators and integrator peripheral kind of areas like, consultants, design engineers, things like that. So they may be thinking, if most knowledge workers are going to be working primarily from home, they may not need certain spaces the way that I would have done them typically when they would be outfitted with 30 or 40 people gathered in different spaces or different breakout rooms and huddle rooms and things like that. So how would you frame the integrator value proposition now, whether it's the corporate or enterprise market, its value to the integration channel, or the integration channel's value to that market? What can it now do with these reimagined spaces?
Well, before I give you my answer to that and my opinion on that, let me admit that this is a work in progress for everybody. We don't have the solution to all the problems yet in the nirvana. We're working on this and we're all trying to achieve it together. And that's what I heard at Enterprise Connect from everybody, that we're in the midst of this transition and we're just learning. Clearly there are technology solutions that integrators need to be aware of that are changing the way this works. If you close your eyes and think of the way we built a conference room 15 or 20 years ago, or God, even 5 years ago, with one pan tilt zoom motorized camera in front and the long bowling alley shot down the table, this was standard. This was how we built them. We had this little blip with telepresence for a while there, but then that went away because it wasn't wise. And we're back to this piece. That's gone. We realize that doesn't work. Now that we're home and we get a meeting invitation and we press a button and we're in the meeting, and it doesn't matter what platform we're on, and we've got a great camera shot, we can see people's faces, we can hear them clearly. That's now the standard. So how do I have that experience when I'm in a conference room? Well, part of that is platforms that support multiple video streams to make sure that everybody in the room, instead of being a tiny picture down a bowling alley lane, has a nice tight shot. That's whether that's one camera doing multiple streams, whether that's the platform interpolating the streams, how that works, interoperability. There's a lot of things that need to be worked out. How the cameras make that shot, clearly that's AI and machine learning inside the technology that's enabling to say, right, these are the 5 faces, this is the person speaking, that's how we're going to conform the shot. Most of the platforms in the industry are working on that. Most of the technology companies in the industry are working toward that. Obviously, the best ideas will survive, but that's that whole meeting equity piece that we're talking about. The idea that everybody, no matter where they are, will get an equal share at the table. And I know I've said this before, so I apologize if it's a repeat, but how many audio calls have you been on in a meeting where everybody in the room said, okay, everybody now, time to everybody be quiet. We need to hear what the people on the far end have to say. We have to stop talking over them. That just doesn't work anymore. That's not going to be an acceptable solution. No matter where you are participating in a meeting, whether it's traveling or using a handheld device or in the room or in a home office, you have to be able to contribute equally, 100%, interrupt, make a point, visually see the same things that other people are seeing. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about meeting equality, is that we're only beginning to resolve these issues with the technology, and it's that journey that I said before that we're on the part of. But most of the people in the industry admit that that's definitely where we have to go.
So I want to pick up on that idea of equity, which you talked about, and I think you're a pretty eloquent expositor of. Obviously, in the industry, a lot of people are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They talk about issues like racism, sexism, homophobia, but there's also an issue of ableism, the idea of Are you going to give people who might have some kind of a handicap or a disability, some encumbrance that prevents them from going into the office, a full experience equal to everyone else, those who can go into the office, those who are participating without those same kinds of encumbrances? And you've already kind of touched on this, but you're such a passionate advocate of this idea of avoiding this ableist tendency. Can you talk a little bit about how these trends will enable us to get away from ableism and really open things up to people who might have a disability or other encumbrance?
Well, this is one of the few silver linings that came out of the pandemic. When we were forced to stay here, and I've been in a home office for 2 decades now. It's what I do. But most people had this as an experience for the first time. And when we were using these cameras and headsets and speaker devices in our home offices, we realized, first of all, that we need something better. It can't just be the stuff that's built into our gear, because that's really not adequate if we want to present ourselves well. And better means quality equipment, reliable equipment, enterprise monitorable equipment, and good lighting. You wouldn't want to see what I look like if I had my lights off right now. But we also then started to experience what people who are homebound and disabled or uncomfortable going into work have experienced all the time. And it created an equal playing field, so that if I'm a colleague that's in a wheelchair, or taking care of young children or something else, and I can't travel somewhere, I now have the same experience that they did. We leveled the playing field accidentally, but beautifully accidentally. We leveled the playing field. And then we started up with all of these virtual conferences and virtual sessions. And again, most of them were bad. Some of them are getting better. We had a lot of learning to do to figure out how to do it. This Enterprise Connect that I attended, even though it was in person, still had a virtual element. And I think that's something that we in the industry need to really put our shoulder up against the door and make sure it never closes again. That we can't be in a situation where either offices are built, or conferences or seminars take place, where people who we realize now are not able to travel for whatever reason are not able to participate. We really need to hold the door open for everybody, or the expression is send the elevator back down for everybody else. So I do think that for all bits of diversity, we need to be celebrating people equally. And and I've gotten in trouble with this in the past, and I'm not going to get in trouble again today, but I don't believe in tokenism. I believe that we should be celebrating everyone equally. There's no reason why industry awards should be, the old white men club, and that's it. There's no reason why we should have a best female award for the year, because that we really need to have their own. You can't think of somebody that would deserve the real award. So we're now finally starting to have these conversations in a healthy way, where we can talk about diversity, we can talk about equality, and we can talk about being, race blind, gender blind, blind to all of the things that would make us any different, and really start to embrace and accept those differences. It's probably more a Star Trek thing than an AV thing, but I support it entirely.
Your next visit will be the Star Trek podcast.
There you go.
But just to kind of close the loop on Enterprise Connect, obviously, as you say, a lot of what you saw, I think, reinforced your existing perceptions and your existing analysis. Was there anything that surprised you, or maybe caused you to turn an idea that you had on its head?
Oh, really good question. I'm still processing everything that I saw and everything that I learned at the show. Um, some interesting things, we've been talking about CPaaS, platforms as a service in this industry for a long time, integrating into business technology, and we're starting to see that really actually happen. We were talking about video going into the contact centers, so that you can have one way and in some cases two-way visual communication. We're starting to see that happening. We're starting to see a lot more virtual contact center technology, communication enterprise experience, however you want to phrase the term. But people working from home and dealing, as agents and working with this. So a lot of the trends that we had been predicting for a very long time, video is the new voice. We're there now. And we're in a situation a little bit later on than distance learning was, which is also a big topic, but not at the show. Where okay, we're there now. What do we do? And we didn't really have the answer. We really kind of need to realize that we're dealing with new mediums, so we need to massage the message, and we need to massage the tools and the way we work on it. So that really surprised me, that we finally have, if you look back a few years ago, we've checked just about every box that we've had in the industry, with the one exception being interoperability. Because interoperability, every time we seem to get close on it, somebody else comes along and drops a bomb on it that makes things not work. Whether we're talking about chat platforms now, or everything needs to be web based as opposed to SIP based, and it's all very that stuff's always going to be every manufacturer and every platform fighting for its own preference. But other than interoperability, I'm very pleased where this industry has gone. I'm in my fourth decade at this point of trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, and it was nice to pause and take back and look that it's like, yeah, that thing that we all did during the pandemic, that's what I do for a living. Now you finally know.
Absolutely, yes. And I think it is important, even recognizing the horrors of the pandemic, and those go without saying, to see that there were some silver linings. And I think it was a pivot opportunity. You need to look at some of these inflection points, and as painful and horrible and regrettable as some of those points may be in and of themselves, they do represent a fresh beginning and a fresh start. And it gives us a chance to evolve and improve. And there can be long-lasting benefits if you think about it in the long scope of history. So hopefully this is one of those things where we as a society have pivoted. We have recognized meeting equity. We've recognized the ability of people to work from home, knowledge worker flexibility, and maybe those will be long-lasting benefits all of us can kind of hang our hat on.
Absolutely. And it was a pleasure seeing my colleagues, some of them for the first time in person, some of them for the first time in a long time in person. It was a pleasure seeing my competitors. It was a pleasure seeing how many people in the midst of this pandemic, even though they're feared for their life and, the supply chain issues may not be the best in the world, that they wanted to be out with public, telling the honest truth. You have a lot of respect for the people that showed up for the show. And I lost a little respect for some of the vendors that chose not to show up this year for those reasons, that they didn't want to, not that they wanted to be virtual. They didn't even want to be virtual. They were afraid to talk to their customers and to the people in the industry, and that was a little disheartening. But other than that, it was really a wonderful event, and I'm really pleased that I was there. Aircraft did a great job as a general manager, and I'll be attending that show hopefully for years to come.
So I think I would be remiss not to mention big news last week. IMCCA announced that it is continuing to work with CEDIA Expo. It should be noted that CEDIA Expo is one of our own properties here within Emerald X, the parent company of Commercial Integrator. IMCCA, I think, is well known for delivering outstanding thought leadership content, educational content, things of that nature. Can you talk a little bit about the value of the partnership with Jason McGraw and CEDIA Expo, and what you have planned as an organization to really bolster the integrators who work in that channel and maybe do some of the resimercial stuff and also work from home kind of stuff?
Well, it's a little early on to be putting all of the ideas that you just mentioned together, but we are thinking about it. We're starting to write down the sessions that we want to go over. We think this work from home thing is one of those situations where everybody says they kind of think they know what it is, but then when you get right down to it, there are nuances, there are skill sets, there are tricks, things that people don't really understand that we can teach, and that's going to be one of the key parts of the sessions that we take care of in the work from home pavilion at CEDIA. And this whole idea that, again, I'm looking at you because I'm looking at the camera. If I
Mhm.
were looking at you, it would look like I wasn't looking at you. Now, that's a very easy thing to get used to learning. Same thing about lighting, same thing about high quality sound, same thing about what to set up. I'm a nutcase when it comes to, the pop culture stuff in my background, but dealing with some of that, I'm also, just as you are, a content creator. There's nothing, very complicated about taking a work from home situation and turning it into something that someone can create content either as a hobby or for a business or for their enterprise. So we'll definitely get into some of those topics again. It's always a pleasure for the IMCCA to get the chance to work with Jason McGraw, who is, a Mr. Show guy, and has done this for more years than I care to count. And it's probably, without teasing too much going forward, it's probably just the start of the relationship that the IMCCA and the Emerald Pubs Emerald Expo is going to put together to work together in some ways, because we have so many things that we share in common, and the IMCCA is very proud of managing agnostic education, agnostic. We're not coming from a specific perspective, and that's a downside at a lot of trade shows that we wind up being at during the course of the year. That some of the education really turns out to be glorified commercials from exhibitors. We're really looking to have a certain quality that we all as an industry support, and that we're working on very, very heavily with a number of people in the industry. So I look forward to seeing people there. I believe it's the end of September in Dallas for CEDIA this year. That and all the other trade shows that I'm going to be at, you should look for me and reach out to me online. I'm always available to chat with customers and let people know what my thoughts are of the industry and share as much as I've learned.
Exciting times ahead for sure, and you definitely are. I think I referred to you as a servant leader of the industry the last time I saw you, and I really believe it to be true because you try to invest of yourself in the industry. So I mean that in the best possible way. You invest of yourself in the industry, and I would certainly recommend anyone who wants to get your perspective on things or your advice on things, reach out to David because he will gladly lend some of his insight to you.
I can't fit servant leader of the industry on my business card. I just use the word gadfly. That just kind of works. I bug everybody until things change the way they should.
Well, thank you so much, David, for being on the AV Plus podcast. I really do appreciate your presence. Once again, want to thank David Danto, who is IMCCA's Director of Emerging Technology and Poly's Director of UC Strategy and Research, for being here today.
Thanks very much, Dan.
I am Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief of Commercial Integrator. We'll be back here next week with another edition of the AV Plus podcast and more great content ahead on commercialintegrator.com. Thank you.